Hey everyone. I know that yesterday we had some technical difficulties, and I know a lot of you were looking forward to the topic. How do you get your spouse to open up? I ended up getting swamped with some appointments, and so I had to put off reattempting the broadcast until now. But I wanted to get this out there. I wanted to answer this question for those of you who are looking forward to it. We're going to continue to excuse Heather, my business partner. She did just have a baby a few weeks back, and so as you can imagine, she's a little bit busy at the moment, but she's telling me that she will start resuming doing these live streams with me in the coming weeks. So with that said, the topic for this week is, okay, how do I get my spouse to open up? Or you know, we actually take a lot of these topics from comments in the group here, and so the actual question was, in just full form, someone was asking, how do I get my spouse to open up and be romantic to me? Show me that he cares about something other than himself. She goes on and says, I want us to be as close as possible, and I want him to feel like he's my best friend. Our marriages can be great, not just one-sided or bad like his family's was. He's getting better, but as soon as something happens bad, he shuts down again. So what I'm hearing from this, there's not just one question. There's several questions. How do I get my spouse to open up and communicate? How do I encourage romance? How do I encourage care towards, she's asking, how do I help him show some care towards me? And then there's even, how do I, what happens when something reminds her husband of those bad things that happen? And so I want to take each of those just very briefly and just describe what's going on. So first off, we have, okay, the question, how do you get your spouse to open up and communicate? I would say very, very often when there is a breakdown in communication, when someone is not talking, when someone is shutting down, they're avoiding conversations, there's something getting in the way. There is some measure of discomfort. There's some reason why they don't feel safe. Now, very frequently, what that is it could be a couple things. One, it could be that they don't feel safe or comfortable or trust. They don't feel like they can be open enough in the conversation. Sometimes this results from if there's been a lot of criticism or judgment, if there's been a lot of pain in the relationship. Other times it can be result as a big pain. If someone's really angry and upset, they might not open up and communicate. But if we had to really boil that down, once again, it's about not feeling the ability to open up and be vulnerable, to be themselves, to feel like that's going to be productive or safe or like it will do anything. So what do you do about something like that when your spouse doesn't open up? Very much it's going to come down to needing to identify what that barrier is, where the source of discomfort or pain is, and doing something about it. So if there has been a lot of criticism and judgment, then there needs to be demonstration that those things can be different. And if there's been, if there's a lot of discomfort or just a lack of trust in the ability to be open, then there needs to be steps taken to create a safe environment. And that will depend on situation to situation. Now let's say that though you can't even get to that point where you can't even talk about what the problem is. I understand that's a very difficult situation, and if you can't even talk about problems, I would say, that is the number one cause of a breakdown in a relationship. If you can't talk about problems, if you can't reliably resolve issues, I would say 100% that each one of the people that come my way, that's the one common thing that I see in all of them. They can't talk about problems. So it's important to have someone open up. So if you can't do that, if you can't have them open up and talk about problems, what do you do? I would say by far, acts of service and just serving the heck out of that partner is one way of trying to bridge that gap. Not a guarantee, absolutely, but it's very possible in those situations that even as you start serving your partner, they might react poorly. They might see that you're trying and compare themselves and say, well, have some guilt about not trying themselves. Or there might be other issues getting in the way. And this is where I generally recommend, if it's really getting that critical, that you seek some extra support, because there's going to be something in your specific situation that's getting in the way. On to the next question. So about encouraging romance. I mean, this is the reason why I'm guessing these questions are all tied together here for this individual that asked it is because in many ways the situation is connected. Let's say if you can't communicate with your partner, if you can't open up and you can't be open, how the heck are you going to be romantic with that person? If you think about it, like being romantic, being close, being intimate, is how much you can do that is very much a measure of how much trust there is, how much safety is in that relationship. And so if that trust and safety and comfort in the relationship isn't there, how do you have that romance which requires those things? And so in order to help romance come on, we need that first step. We need to have that comfort there. Now, once that is there, let's say that things are comfortable and there just isn't any romance. It's going to be very much about communicating expectations and desires and wants. Even in healthy relationships, that's sometimes a problem. I know I myself, I just had this conversation with my wife last night. I was talking to her. I said, you know what? Sometimes I have hesitations asking for things in the relationship, and then we talked about that for a while and it ended up being very pleasant. But it's absolutely what's needed when there are things that we want. I was able to tell my wife, I wanted to connect a little bit more with her, and so I was able to share some of my thoughts there. I think being very clear about what our expectations are, what our desires are, in a very kind and loving way, in a very encouraging way, is a good way to encourage that romance. On the flip side, if I were to go to my wife and tell her, you know what, you're never romantic with me, you're never doing this, why can't you do this? If I'm coming at her with accusations and blame and finger pointing, that's absolutely going to shut that down. It's going to be seen as nagging and complaining. It's not going to encourage that romance. Same thing, as we go to the next question, how do you encourage care towards you? Part of that is going to be being clear with your expectations, and another part is a lot of these other steps. There's not going to be care towards you if there's not comfort there first, if there isn't any benefit in the relationship, if there isn't a lot of enjoyment in the relationship. People show care for the things that they value. And a lot of times when there is that lack of care, it's because all those other beneficial elements of the relationship have started dropping away. People then invest less in the relationship, and then that further feeds that problem. You feel less care, you invest less. Then you feel less care and you invest less. Many times the solution to that is finding those loops, finding those cycles that are feeding into these problems and addressing them. But first and foremost, I think that first step that I talked about, how do you open up communication, is very much necessary before a lot of these other problems can be handled. I don't know if anyone is, I see people are listening. If you have questions, I would love to answer them. I've just been, without Heather here, I sometimes feel like I'm just kind of spitting out, a wall of information there with interaction. So please let me know if you have any specific questions about this topic. I would love to answer you here. And then The last little, I'll keep moving on as long as there's no comments. The last little bit of this question, this woman was asking about how sometimes her husband has these reminders of bad, something bad will happen, he'll shut down again. So some sort of reminder of some past hurt. And so how do you move past that? And the reason why I'm answering all these questions together is because they all intertwine, they all connect. And very much this item connects as well. The whole reason things shut down suddenly whenever something bad happens, it's because all of these other elements are not in place. When there's no comfort there, and there's no romance, and there's no care, what ends up happening is people start to feel a little bit needy. They still feel a little bit deprived. They feel a little bit resentful, and it becomes easier to focus in on those problems and focus in on the evidence that those problems are still going on. And so that, like I said, these are all connected, and we can prevent that shutting down, that pivot in direction towards the negative, by taking care of all these other issues. That is absolutely a result of all these lacks in the relationship. So I hope that helps some people out. Thanks, Jerome. Thanks for the encouragement. Jerome saying I'm doing great. Great. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I hope that helps people out. If you have further questions, please let us know. We do keep track of the comments, especially on these videos, and I'll try to help out as best as I can. If not, like I said, Heather will be back next week, and we do have some questions. Okay, so Doug is asking, what do you do when they always seem to turn away? Which is a great question. I addressed that just a little bit here. So I was saying, okay, well, what happens if you're trying to open up communication and they just won't? They won't do anything. They won't even talk to you. If I had to give some general advice, because there's going to be general advice, there's going to be specific advice. I know Doug here, and so I'm actually going to contact Doug a little bit later. But some general advice, like I mentioned earlier, is we need to, it would be a good idea to serve your partner as much as you can. Really feed what they're needing. And if you don't know where to start, you can start with the 5 love languages. I do think that's a good tool. I don't think it covers everything. If you just look up 5 love languages on Google, it's pretty prominent there. I also do think a good theory to kind of try to meet people's needs, there's what's called 6 emotional needs, and I'm trying to see if I have one of the books on them. The last name on, I know a book, the big person who pioneered that, it's Chloe Madonis. But there's basically, she's talking about 6 basic emotional needs, and if you can meet those 6 needs well, the relationship becomes healthy. This is just as a way to try and make the relationship seem a little bit more fulfilling. It can sometimes break the ice a little bit if you just pour yourself into serving the other person. Doesn't always work, but it's something that I would suggest as a first attempt. This is of course if, for instance, trying to talk about it yields no results. Trying to be understanding and caring and address concerns yields no results. If you've been discussing it and just you're met with wall after wall and they just keep turning away, like I said, my suggestion is to serve your partner as much as you can. The goal there is we want to increase a certain type of commitment, the type of commitment that comes about from a relationship being beneficial and having it, from the relationship feeling good. And if we can increase that level, that feeling right there, that level of commitment, it's much more likely that the partner that's being completely silent, completely turning away, would want to do something to reach out a little bit. It just becomes more likely. Now, like I said, Doug, I'll contact you right after this, and we'll take care of your specific situation, because that's going to sometimes specific situations need more specific solutions. But if no one else has any other questions, I'll leave it at that. And once again, post your questions here. I know this. I'm getting to this broadcast a day later, so sometimes I'm a little bit less active over the weekend. But if you don't hear back from me, I'll certainly get to it after the weekend. All right. Once again, this is Mark Johnston with High Thrive Coaching. Thanks for watching us, and we'll see you again next week.